at WDKN.com.
I love listening to it over and over. I love it.
This is 101.5 The One at WDKN, Dixon's Country Music Home.
You're listening to The Old Timers Show, presented by RFC Broadband on Dixon's only live and local station, 101.5 The One and WDKN. Now, here's your host.
And a pleasant good morning to each of you, and welcome into the Old Timers program. We're glad to have you with us. In the studio with us is Mr. Justin Spurlock, and you know him if you've read his column. He is a historian as well as a history teacher. Justin, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be in here with you this morning.
Man, it's good to be have you in the studio with us this morning, and we were just talking before the show. There's a lot of history as we enter into, as we have arrived, I should say, to 2022. First of all, for people who don't know, which is probably everybody's read your column, how long have you been writing on the history of Dixon?
Well, I'd say I've been studying it for a really long time, but as far as actually writing about it and putting things down into columns and different stories, really started that back in the spring of 2020 during the pandemic, to be honest with you. Like most people, I decided to stay inside whenever this whole pandemic got started, and it seemed like the smart thing to do. And I had quite a good book collection. I like to read. I like to watch TV and movies like everybody else, but I still have a really good appreciation for reading. So I decided to start reading some books during that time, and started reading some of the local history books that I have, like the book that Dr. Corlew wrote, Mr. Clement wrote. There's some good books out there about Dixon that have been written. And so, I just started reading those and, finding some really interesting stories. And I think the first project that I wrote was about the history of the Dixon County schools. I worked for the school system, and I was just kind of curious, we've got the Dixon County High School, which just has a lot of history. It goes back to 1972. You've got Creekwood, which started back in 2002. But I thought, what were the schools like before that era, 50 years ago in the 70s when they built Dixon County High School? What was going on before that? And started learning about how the old Dixon High School was over here in downtown Dixon on College Street, where the Dixon Middle School is today. And that went all the way back to about 1919. And then even before that, there was a school over here on Walnut Street. But I found out that, the Dixon County schools, which had been around in the 1800s, really the modern school system got started in the early 1900s. And so I just wanted to write about that and kind of, get that story kind of down in a concise little story for anybody to read, to kind of see where it started and how we ended up where we're at. And that was the first project. I think I wrote maybe about 10 different articles about how we got from early 1900s to about the 1970s, and people found that pretty interesting, so I started looking up some different topics after that.
So what about that, doing that research, what most surprised you to learn during that process?
Well, I was surprised about a lot of things. I think like most everybody else, I just assumed that we had always had, schools like we have now, and it was kind of surprising to me to find out that, just 100 years back, we didn't really have the high schools like we have today, the elementary schools that we have today. They were like little one-room schoolhouses. I found that to be pretty interesting. I think we kind of take for granted. Sometimes we think things have always been the way that they are. Until you really get to researching, you find out that things have changed quite a bit and they've evolved over time. And I found that pretty interesting. I also was interested in sports. I love sports, like most of your listeners that tune in to listen to, Dixon County High School, Creekwood Sports. I found it interesting that, we had a college back here in Dixon, late 1800s, early 1900s, that actually had a college football team.
In Dixon?
That played, here in Dixon. They had a college baseball team. They were known as the Maroons.
Everybody just said, in Dixon?
Yeah. So, and that's a long story. I've kind of written a few articles about the college, how it got here and how it left. It was only here for about 20 years. From about 1890 to about 1910, roughly. But during those 20 years, it was the pride of the town. I mean, it provided entertainment. You got to think before radio, before television. People would go down to the school and they would watch plays, hear speeches from prominent people. go watch sports. Baseball and football are the two that I found, evidence that they were playing. Not sure about basketball yet, still looking for that evidence, but I know for sure that they were playing football and basketball at the college level, and they would play other colleges around Tennessee. So that's some interesting history that's kind of gotten lost over the years that I found really interesting, that I've tried to, just kind of write down and make sure that it survives, and then hopefully people will find my research, find my stories, and maybe even learn more about it and share with us even more than what I.
Or even, as you said, find some of the old articles that may have been passed down in their families.
Sure.
For years.
And old pictures.
Yeah.
One good thing about social media, and I know social media it can be good and bad, right?
There's one good thing.
It's like a coin. There's the good side and the bad side to it. But the good side of it is that if I have a question or some sort of artifact, I can put that on the internet, social media, and other people in Dixon, and maybe used to live in Dixon but live somewhere else, can chime in and explain to me, what that is, or maybe share a picture that they found in their grandmother's attic, or whatever the case may be. But been able to with other people, research on my own, and then able to kind of share that with other people and see what they know. And so that's been pretty interesting, and that's, I think, how we've been able to maybe find out more about that early era that it's kind of been lost, some of it, but
well, there's and you and I were talking prior to the show, there's been a lot of as we know in our time, this coming in 2020, we lost a lot, prominent people here in Dixon County who were impactful. But they go back generations. You take people like David Shepard, who was state representative, city councilman, and they go back generations. And I hate to throw out names, but those are, you find a lot of history on people like that.
Sure. Yeah, we've got a lot of people here in Dixon who have done a lot. And those local stories about different people are also very interesting, and I've tried to throw that in to the articles that I write. One of the ones that I've talked about recently was Dr. Robert Corlew, or Mr. Robert Corlew, whose son is known as Dr. Corlew. It gets kind of confusing because there's three gentlemen named Robert Corlew who people that are listening have probably heard of, but Mr. Corlew, Robert Corlew Sr., actually goes back, and he went to the Dixon College that we had here, and that's who educated him. He went on to law school in Nashville, and then came back to Dixon and became the superintendent of schools. And so one of the articles that I wrote about him talked about how he, was educated here, grew up here, loved it here, wanted to do more for the school system, and so his story and kind of backstory is one of the articles that I've written, and I want to try to do that with more of the articles going forward, is focus on the history of the town, kind of stay on the timeline, but highlight certain people who were important to us that have done some amazing things here in Dixon and Dixon County, and kind of highlight their achievements, their life story. And I'm going to try to do more of that in the future. Got a few people in mind already, but as I get closer to the modern times, there are going to be more impactful people that I want to write about and tell the people about.
Well, with us is Justin Spurlock, who is the history teacher here at the high school. Justin's also, hopefully we're going to convince him to start doing the Old Timer Show here on the radio for us, as well as Know Your County. So we wanted to have him in the studio with us this morning because he does know Dixon history. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of the Old Timers program right here on 101.5 The One in WDKN.
Let's talk about your internet options in this area. Cable internet, cell phone internet, and the phone company. Does that cover it? And not everybody has all three options. So if you're looking to make a change, try RFC Broadband, a local business right here in Dixon, offering the speeds you need at prices you can afford with no data caps. 615-375-8662 or rfcbroadband.com.
In times of joy, in moments of grief, broadcasters come through, even when all else fails. Today, with more ways than ever to experience the moments that transform our lives, Americans still choose broadcast radio and television more than all other media combined. We are the local broadcasters of radio and television, reaching more people, touching more lives. Brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Let's face it, life looks a little different. During these times, we're doing our best to keep our minds and bodies strong. And getting a flu shot helps us stay healthy, so we don't miss out on what matters. Like having game night at home. Yeah, can't do that while sick with the flu. Now imagine family movie night that your daughter can't live without. Well, that's ruined. And don't forget your uncle's socially distanced cookout. See, that's why it's important to be at our strongest. Every year, millions of people in the U.S. get the flu. Especially now, no one has time to miss out on moments that matter. So get your flu shot. Find out more at getmyflushot.org. Brought to you by the AMA, CDC, and the Ad Council.
All right, we're back here on the Old Timers program. In the studio with us this morning is Justin Spurlock, and historian and history teacher here at Dixon County High School. Now, Justin, you've been teaching for people who may have lost track with your career. You've been teaching history for quite some time.
I've been teaching for about 10 years. My career in education has kind of taken me to some different places. So I've taught, out of state, around the state, and luckily, over the past few years, I've ended up back here at home, which is where I've always wanted to be. So I've been here now for a few years. I actually started over at the Dixon Middle School for several years, taught history there, coached the soccer team over there, and then was lucky enough to be able to move over to the Dixon County High School. And so I'm loving my time up there. I won't ever teach anywhere else. That's the place for me. So plan on being there for a really long time.
So do you find that people are more interested in history than you thought they would be?
Yeah, and I think things are kind of changing. I think people are becoming more interested in history over the past few years. I think there's just been a lot of things going on in pop culture, some different, unique things that have happened, which require people to kind of look back in history and ask themselves, has this ever happened before? And if so, how did that turn out before? So as a history teacher, I've gotten to answer a lot of questions about, different things as far as, what can we compare this to in the past? And so people seem like they're a little more interested in history these days. And with social media, I'm able to share a lot of that stuff and, get feedback. So I think maybe, 10, 15 years ago when I was interested in history, I've always been interested in history, but back then I didn't think too many people were, but maybe it's just, with social media and these new different ways of communicating that we're finding out that people really do have a interest in history. And really locally here, I've found that even people that you don't think are interested in it are very interested in, where we came from and how we got here. Yeah. So
the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Absolutely.
That's what you find when you start digging into or researching, I should say, historical events and things of that nature that happen in different locations, in particular where you grew up. You learn more and more about the history of Dixon. What really excites you, and what was like, wow, I never would have thought that.
I just love to find new stories that I've never heard before. There's a story coming out next week that I just submitted yesterday, so I guess it'll be next Wednesday I'll be releasing that. And I also want to mention that people can go to DixonCountyHistory.com to read any of the stories that I write. I have a website, and I like to put them on there. So if anybody wants to read more, go there. But I just look for different things. Right now in the timeline of the articles that I'm writing, I'm really writing a series about the history of downtown Dixon and the city of Dixon. And I've really enjoyed it because I wanted to pick some sort of focus instead of just, because there's so many different things that you could write about when it comes to Dixon County. And we have, great communities. You got White Bluff, you've got Burns, you've got Charlotte. But downtown Dixon has always been fascinating to me. And, I've been lucky to work down here and know a lot of people that own the businesses. And, we got a lot of new people moving to town. And so, I see a lot of people kind of gravitating towards Main Street with the parades and all the different activities that we do. So I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of give people, the history of this area right here. And one thing that surprised me is how many, major politicians that came through Dixon way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and famous people. I wrote an article a few weeks ago about Thomas Edison. Everybody knows Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb, sometimes called America's greatest inventor. He came up with a lot of the things that we use even today, back a little over 100 years ago. But he made his way to downtown Dixon, and so I thought that was fascinating. So I started researching, and it took a while. It's hard to sort of find all the details on this, but I was able to sort of pinpoint when he came down here and some of the things that he did. And, the story is he was, at his lab in New Jersey, Menlo Park, New Jersey. That's where he lived. That's where he operated. That's where he invented things. He had a really cool laboratory up there. And it is said that he had every type of substance in the world, every kind of chemical and element and all these things. But he was looking for something called cobalt. And I don't know a lot about cobalt, but he was looking for it in about 1907, 1906, in that time frame. And he couldn't find any. And he started putting the word out there. He needed some cobalt for a new invention. And lo and behold, he found some here in Middle Tennessee. It was actually in northern Hickman County. And so he came down here. He took the train all the way to Nashville. And then he got on the train going through Dixon County. And then he went down to Hickman County looking for this cobalt. And when he found something that he thought was cobalt, he wanted to run a test. And turns out that he needed some chemicals to run this test that he didn't have with him. So he started asking around to the people there in northern Hickman County, where is the nearest drugstore? Where can I get, these chemicals, these drugs that I need to run my test? And everybody told him, the nearest place is downtown Dixon. So he hops on the train and he comes to downtown Dixon, and he's on Main Street here. And I believe, if I've got this correct, and I've tried to narrow it down, where the Ginger Hibachi restaurant is, I think that's the space where he went and visited. And
because did it used to be a drugstore?
It used to be a hardware store, and I think even further back in there, it may have been a drugstore, maybe like an all-purpose store.
Yeah.
We think it may have been there. I hate to say it with too much confidence, because the further back you go, the harder it is to pinpoint stuff. But we think it might have been there. And there was a restaurant there. I don't know if you remember. It was called Ace's years ago.
Oh, it started the same year we bought the station.
Yeah, and it was a cool little restaurant, right? Yeah. But they had on their menu the Edison burger, and they had made the claim that he had been to that place. So that's one of the reasons why we think that's probably the place. But anyways, he comes in there, and he says he wants these chemicals, and they look at him and they say, no, that's dangerous. You can't have that. And he explains to him that he's Thomas Edison, and they basically give him the keys and say, here, whatever you need, sir, get what you need. So he was able to determine it was cobalt, and there was not a whole lot of it here, but the stuff that was near here was pretty high quality. So he had some of that sent back to New Jersey. He wasn't here for very long, but they say that within a few hours of him being on Main Street, that everybody in town came and wished him off, and probably wanted to shake his hand, maybe get an autograph or two, who knows. Yeah. But some different people like that have showed up. That was exciting when I found that for the first time. I'd never really heard about too many people writing about that. I got a good friend in Burns named Tom Forehand, and his mother actually wrote an article about Thomas Edison in 1955 in the Nashville Banner. And that was where I started my search, and then I was able to find articles from 1906, 1907 that supported that claim and gave us some more details. But it's funny how one person tells you about something, and then you're able to catch it before it gets lost to history. So I think that's a really cool story that we were able to save and kind of bring back.
Well, that's probably a story I would venture to say that most people had never been aware of or heard.
I think you're right.
As generations have gone on and passed on, what was the information passed on, to the point where you talk about the article, but prior to that, that's probably very little. Once it happened, that was it.
And that's the last time I can find anybody writing about it was 1955. So, and most of the really good books that have written about Dixon are a little bit older. Dr. Corlew's book, Robert Corlew Jr. Wrote a very complete book about Dixon County, probably the most complete book that's been written about the history of Dickson County, and I think it was published in 1956. You know, Bob Clement wrote a book. I think it was published in 1980, 81.
Yeah.
So most of the good books, and then of course the Bicentennial Commission produced some really good stuff about 20 years ago. But besides that, you know, there hasn't been a whole lot written about local history. So that was another motivating reason for me to kind of do that was, you know, look up different topics, you know, the Civil War or World War II, World War I. You're going to find tons of sources about these different topics. But when it comes to local history, there's only so many people that have written about it. And like you said, you know, you hate to see these things get lost. So that's probably been my biggest motivation as far as writing them. I probably, if everything had already been written, probably wouldn't have ever sat down and done this project, because I would have thought, well, it's all already right there. But because some of these stories were so interesting to me, and I think my students find them interesting, I try to throw in, you know, different local stories in with, you know, the national history, the state history that we teach in schools. You know, I'm teaching World War I here in the next couple of weeks over at the high school, and we've got several local stories related to World War I, and I'll try to throw some of those in so that the students, you know, can get a feel for the national history, for the state history, but also how did my community, you know, fit into all that back then. And people might be interested to hear about World War I. We had the first draft where we started drafting young men because we didn't, you know, have a big enough army to really protect ourselves and to go out there and fight. So we had to implement a draft, and there were 151 men from Dickson County that had to be drafted. And there was a process that took place, and it started in Washington, D.C. when they drew the lottery numbers. But we can go back to 1917 and read the local papers here and kind of see how that fit in. And so that's how I know that there was 151 guys from Dickson County that had to be drafted. And then they went down to Georgia a couple of months later, and then they ended up over in Europe. And you can kind of trace that and document that and summarize that for the people here. And when they see how that kind of fits in with some of the major events that they already know about, I just think it makes history come alive just that much more.
Well, that's pretty amazing. You're tuned into the Old Timers program here on 101.5 The One at WDKN. Justin Spurlock, historian and history teacher at the high school, is with us this morning. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back here on 101.5 The One and WDKN.
Business internet is a must. Paying bills, sending emails, updating your website, running social media campaigns, even your phone and credit card machine need reliable internet. But your options are limited, and every provider has its drawbacks. That's why RFC Broadband for Business is here. A truly local business offering wireless high-speed internet options for your business. Affordable prices, no wires, no contracts, no data caps. RFC Broadband for Business, 615-375-8662 or rfcbroadband.com. Simple billing, rural coverage, and again, no contracts or data caps. It's all designed with you in mind. See the difference a local company makes. RFC Broadband for Business, 615-375-8662 or rfcbroadband.com. Currently not available in all areas. Call for availability.
You want to feel connected, at one with your world, informed, included, and inspired. So no matter where you are,
We have an accident on the expressway.
when important things happen,
You see this man, contact authorities immediately.
we're here, at all hours, in the moment, on every device in your life. Your local radio and TV broadcasters. We investigate and inform,
Our political investigation saved taxpayers.
give back to the community,
Our radio station is now accepting donations to help rebuild this community.
even save
It is
lives.
time to just hunker down. It's too late now to leave.
America's #1 source for news, weather, and information on your radio, TV, computer, tablet, and smartphone. We are broadcasters. Always here for you, wherever here may be. Tell Washington local stations matter by texting radio to 52886. Furnished by NAB and the station. Message and data rates may apply.
All right, we're back here on the Old Timers program. Kenneth Forte in the studio with you, along with Justin Spurlock, and we're happy to have him up with us early this morning at 7 o'clock. We're glad to have him in the studio, his history teacher. Now, Justin also has history with the radio station. For those of you who may not be aware, he was a young boy once. And running like every young boy, when you open a mic, they want to talk. So tell us about your early years working here at WDKN.
So I was really fortunate to get the opportunity as a very young man to work at WDKN back in 1999, so about 20 years ago, when I was still in high school. I was lucky enough to be able to get hired and started off working on Saturday and Sunday mornings from 6 a.m. probably till about noon, 1, 2, somewhere in there. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. It was a great experience. I actually had kind of pestered the people that owned the radio station for a little while about hiring me when I heard that there might be an opportunity. And so I was very lucky to get to do that. Saturday morning was always my favorite because Saturday morning had all the history shows, and I was always into history, even as a young guy. I was always fascinated by the different wars and the president of the United States and just all of that stuff always fascinated me. And so getting to work on Saturday morning was a real treat because Saturday morning was, to me, always like the history day in a way because you had Warren Medley, and you had Mr. Reagan, and you had a lot of these guys who really know the history of the town and really know history in general would get on the radio and do their thing. And so Mr. Medley had, this show, Old Timers program, and he would have, different people come in and he would interview them. And I learned so much during that time. About local history, about history in general, and also just about the radio station and how to interview people and how that whole thing works because Mr. Warren Medley, as you know, was a true professional, Hall of Fame, broadcaster. And so just being able to be in his presence for a couple of years every Saturday morning, I think was valuable to me and a lot of things that I ended up doing afterwards. But it was a real treat to get to hear him interview different people from Dixon. He would have a lot of World War II veterans on back then because we still had a lot of those guys around, back in the late 90s. Unfortunately, many of them had passed at this point. But I was lucky enough to hear them interviewed so much back then and would learn a lot of the different things from them. And so that was really valuable to me. And it probably started my love of local history to be able to hear Old Timers program, Know Your County, every Saturday morning. And so I think it influenced me for the rest of my life in a lot of ways, but it's definitely been an influence on what I'm doing now for sure. Yeah. I think if I hadn't met Warren Medley back then, hadn't worked at the radio station back then, I doubt that I would be writing these history columns and would be doing all this research. So I think that's a testament to Mr. Medley and what he kind of leaves behind.
Well, and you got to hear, as you mentioned, firsthand the interviews that he did with people who, World War II veterans, but other folks who had such a historical knowledge of Dixon and had done so much in Dixon. So you got to experience that. I got a chance to experience that firsthand, and it's fascinating the stories that he knew and that he would tell, around Dixon. So you got that experience.
I mean, he was a fascinating fella in his own right. Just hearing his life story was a history lesson in itself. I mean, he went all the way back. He was involved in, Montgomery Bell getting started, the state park and all the things that they did there. He worked for the government for years. Yep. He, obviously was on the radio station from almost the beginning.
Yeah, the station came on the air in 1955, and he joined it in 1956.
Wow. So yeah. I didn't even realize it was that early. I knew he'd been around almost since the beginning, but yeah, he was. It was great to be around him, and I think that's one reason why I have such respect for these shows. Old Timers program, Know Your County, is because I realize that's kind of a legacy that he left. Luckily, we still do those shows, and I'd love to, get some more old timers in here and really talk to them. I kind of threw that out on social media earlier in the week and said, anybody out there would like to be interviewed, I'd love to talk to you about, the old days and just what what's your story. And, there are some people around here that have been around for a really long time that have some really interesting stories. I've talked to several of them. I talked to a lady a few months ago who was in school back in the 1940s. And she went to school right over here on Walnut Street at the old school that doesn't exist, and she could tell you with precision, details about the school. And it's fascinating. I mean, it really is. And so getting those people in here, getting them on the radio is a way to sort of get their legacy recorded
alive.
and keep it alive. So,
well, we're looking forward to that and to expanding the number of people that we talk to on this show. We have for years shared historical interviews of Warren Medley and from our vault, thanks to Dale Reagan, who has the recording of many of them. Reagan's actually Dale's getting ready to come in. So those are that history is still alive and well, and we'll continue to do that. We need to wrap it up. Justin and I will be back at 8 o'clock for the Know Your County program as well. Hope you'll stay tuned for that. We're going to get out of the way and let Mr. Dale Reagan have the studio for Weekends on the Highland Rim right here on 101.5 The One and WDKN.
Let's talk about your internet options in this area: cable internet, cell phone internet, and the phone company. Does that cover it? And not everybody has all three options. So if you're looking to make a change, try RFC Broadband, a local business right here in Dixon, offering the speeds you need at prices you can afford with no data caps. 615-375-8662 or rfcbroadband.com.